estejam extremamente bem aí, diga-se de passagem, não é até então. Deixa eu ver se eu já posso compartilhar. Pode ser que vá, pode ser que não vá. Caso não for, eu acho que provavelmente essa tela estará em preto agora, né? Toda preta. Até que foi, por incrível que pareça, né? Não sei que anomalia aconteceu agora ao ponto de, né? Mas o fato é que foi. Bom, eu tava querendo privar essa live, né? Acho que eu vou fazer isso. Vou deixar aqui, depois eu privo, que é o jeito, né? Então vamos lá, que eu acho que eu vou retomar o assunto da liberdade de livre associação, que foi um fenômeno mundial, né, graças ao advento das redes sociais, entre outros temas, né, dispensacionalismo, arrebatamento, né, a visão luterana disso tudo, né, eu vou dando continuidade com as coisas, né. Mas enquanto não for...
Our sense of superiority. So the global war on terror, in a sense, the target of the information warfare was easy to identify. It was jihadis. It was people that were fighting American soldiers on the battlefield. It was terrorists. Once that ended, they needed to create a new demand for their services. One of those two demands was saying, wait a minute, we have domestic terrorists in the United States, or potential domestic terrorists. They're not actually blowing things up like the jihadis were. They're not actually calling for violence against the United States as the jihadis were. But they may potentially down the road be terrorists. So these government agencies
look at it, trying
these sources in December of 2018, and I would get a package of documents. And this one wasn't government documents. It was sort of a narrative. And the first half of the narrative was, here's the rest of the Russia collusion story that you might be able to put together. Really strong, good leads. And then the second part was, here's this guy named Hunter Biden. If you dig into him, this guy is in all sorts.
Trump years.
And there were references to documents that only recently came out. I knew about in December of 18.
Cara, não sei, né? Ele largou do osso, né? Agora o Lula não acontece a mesma coisa, tá? O FHC, né? Outra coisa também é que é curioso que há muitos anos atrás nenhum desministro do STF iria querer virar presidente da República, né? A cabeça lustrosa lá, talvez ela quer isso, porque ainda tem alguns idiotas, como o Marco Antônio Villa, né? Esse jornalistinho aí que acha que realmente o Alexandre de Moraes salvou a democracia brasileira, né? Se ele salvou a democracia brasileira, eu sei lá, eu salvei os recifes de corais que existem no Brasil, né? Basicamente é isso, né? Se for...
I served for 2 years as chief White House.
Trabalho dispositivo, queria ver.
Overseas, in the hands
Não, tipo assim, mano, pelo amor de Deus, né? Alguns idiotas achar que ele salvou a democracia brasileira, até parece. Então, tipo assim, alguns idiotas, como o Marco Antônio Villa, né? Talvez vão dar voto, né, pro Careca, por achar que ele é o salvador da pátria, né? Nas mãos dos russos, dos chineses, que ele já veio perdido vários dispositivos.
In the hands of Chinese, he's lost several devices. This one luckily was off at a Delaware repair shop, computer repair shop.
The president's son and his company brought in about $11 million between 20 and 2018, working as an attorney, a board member to a Ukrainian gas company accused of bribing a prosecutor, and for a joint venture involving a Chinese businessman now accused of fraud. The records show Hunter Biden's company received nearly $5 million in consulting contracts from that joint venture funded by a Chinese energy company. A snapshot of Hunter Biden's spending shows that for about in late 2017 and early 2018, he spent $100,000 a month on things like luxury hotel rooms, cash withdrawals, dental work, and payment for, according to documents on the hard drive.
There was so much in it, and so much I wish I didn't see. This laptop showed emails between Hunter Biden and oligarch individuals from around the world, and his father at the time was vice president, and there were some very sketchy, if you will, interactions between Hunter Biden and business deals that would take place in China.
Não, então, cara, tipo assim, um bom feito que eles fizeram, né, seja em prol do Brasil ou em prol do mundo, para querer ser presidente do Brasil, né, se lançar a presidente do Brasil. Agora, obviamente, né, essa porcaria do Alexandre talvez sempre quis isso, né, e agora mais ainda como alguns idiotas, como o Marco Antônio Villa, realmente acreditando que ele salvou a democracia brasileira de alguma coisa, né? Se ele salvou a democracia brasileira, eu salvei, sei lá, as matas atlânticas, a Mata Atlântica, a Mata Amazônica das queimadas criminosas, né? Basicamente é isso, né? Ironias à parte, né? Acho que vocês entenderam.
And that's already hit like a nuclear weapon. I mean, all of Washington jumped on it. And I was at The Hill, which is a pretty well-respected mainstream news organization. And for 2 months, the New York Times, ABC News, you can go look and they all matched my studies. They all said it was true.
And that is why tonight, for a second term, as president, nomination for president of the United States of America.
Joe Biden.
The former head of the CIA.
Well, the Hunter laptop story and the suppression of that and the censorship of it was naked election interference, election rigging by government agencies and their lackeys in social media. Your average user probably didn't realize that this was so coordinated until Elon Musk bought Twitter and released what were called the Twitter files.
In the 3 months since, Musk has released an incriminating stream of internal documents revealing what some experts assess to be proof of shocking government censorship at the highest levels.
We found out that there were government agents embedded within Twitter that were contouring those policies.
And the Twitter files were this project that Elon Musk took on when he purchased Twitter, where he allowed reporters like Matt Taibbi and Barry Weiss and Michael Schellenberger to come in and actually read the communications between government agencies and Twitter executives and Twitter engineers, where we discovered a very granular level of government censorship.
And when you look at how it began and the funding mechanisms, all of that unfortunately began during COVID under President Trump. Now, do I think Trump encouraged censorship? No. But you had these deep state agencies who thought, well, given COVID and all, we can just pursue whatever we want. And anyone who gets in the way, we're going to steamroll over.
We have therefore made the assessment that COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
The U.S. is now reporting more COVID-19.
I always imagine this sort of counterfactual. Imagine if at the beginning of 2020, people came out and said, wow, there's this disease, it seems to have a long incubation period where you're asymptomatic. One thing we know is that's really bad because it's really hard to stop something like that. However, very much else about it. We have some general parameters, we have some ideas, but we are still doing experiments. In the meantime, exercise caution. Instead, what happened was this kind of burst of certainty, as if the government and the elite in the United States all understood everything about what COVID was and how you stop it.
Very early on, we started offering prayer because that's what a church can do. So we started having some of our ads taken down. We were just offering prayer. And because the word COVID was present, the ads were taken down. And then some ads were allowed. So we started changing the language, not using the word COVID, not using these trigger words that would become problematic. And again, we never imagined having to think through these words that were perfectly applicable if another human was reading it. But because the algorithms are reading it, algorithms in the text, algorithms in the images, and now we're being censored by algorithms.
My name is Yanya Kelly, senior editor with the Epoch Times. I'm also the host of the show American Thought Leaders, where I've interviewed over 1,000 people who I believe are future thought leaders in their disciplines, whether it's the economy or communist China or the COVID-19 response and many other disciplines.
Recomendo o canal deles,
We published the documentary was about the origins of COVID-19. It wasn't difficult to see that by far the most likely scenario of the COVID-19 origin was in the Wuhan lab. It's actually a very simple argument. The argument is basically looks like a duck, walks like a duck. The level of censorship that we experienced from publishing this documentary was beyond anything. And we really did. We had 3 very prominent channels, American Thought Leaders, which is my show, Crossroads with Joshua Phillip, and Facts Matter with Roman Balmakov. But the effect of it, we actually did an estimate of the cost of that demonetization to us. And a very conservative estimate would be about $25 million in cost and lost revenue from that.
And so this, I don't know if fear is the right, what we haven't figured out is who will be the one defining what is a lie and what is true.
They censored.
What kind of disinformation can
And which report is this? And it was a Judiciary Committee select subcommittee interim staff report. And it essentially laid out exactly how the government teamed up with these institutions to censor accounts like mine, accounts like ComFitten.
Oh yeah, the FBI sent agents over to my home to serve a subpoena. And what was it about? It was about our criticism of the FBI and Justice Department's targeting of Trump.
The Election Integrity Project. They set up a system called the JIRA ticketing system. And what's that? The JIRA ticketing system, government agencies teaming up with private enterprise. And the government agencies were having private enterprise launder their censorship dirty work. Who were these people? DHS. DHS had a cybersecurity agency, CISA. And you had the State Department, the Global Engagement Center, GEC. That was the government side. And then on the other side, you had the private partnership. And what was that? These were the tools. These were the agents who were carrying out the dirty work. Stanford University, Washington State University, Big Tech, Twitter at the time, and Facebook. Together.
And then I suppose there are probably a few sort of the more dastardly, nefarious plotters and planners who are thinking about how do you expand sort of top-down control in a society? How do we flip? How do we invert America? How do we flip civil society so that the elites have more control? And when you have emergencies or situations that can look like emergencies, so I don't think January 6th was an emergency at the Capitol, but it was made to be blown up and look like an emergency, then that creates a narrative through which push for more control about disinformation, misinformation.
E isso aconteceu no Brasil, né? O pessoal quebra a revista tudo e depois fala que foram os patriotas que fizeram a doação.
If you think about this, a sitting president of the United States, elected by the American people, had his Twitter and Facebook accounts frozen. Our founding fathers could not possibly imagine that.
Twitter was clear today that it banned the president for what it feared he would do and the injuries or deaths that could result.
Eu lembro
Report Jennifer Holmes spoke to social media experts about Twitter's unprecedented decision.
Right after January 6th, when he posted a video, calling on his supporters, make sure that you're protesting peacefully.
I know how you feel. Home in peace.
X, I believe, shut down his account and said this is inciting violence. And this is a very interesting argument that they were posing. In U.S. law, under the U.S. Constitution, the First Amendment is absolute, but there are some exceptions. As always, in the law, there's always exceptions. And those exceptions are very limited, rightfully so. Those exceptions include, you can't incite violence. You can't say things that will cause a group of people to become violent. And so, X, or Twitter at the time, was using that argument. Well, we're going to act like the government. We're going to take down the account of the sitting United States president because we believe that he is a danger to the United States.
It started percolating among the deep state during the Trump administration, let's be clear. And it metastasized under Biden. And censorship became an all-of-government mandate. And it was everyone on board to censor Americans and other critics of the regime.
May God bless America, and may God protect our troops.
Well, the biggest case that went to the Supreme Court was a case where a number of doctors who were speaking out against the COVID policies were taken off of Twitter and lost their social media accounts, allegedly because the White House and the federal government during the Biden administration put pressure on those platforms to cancel those speakers. Went all the way up to the Supreme Court in a case called Murphy versus Missouri, and that case is a very good case. The evidence that the Supreme Court recounts is bone-chilling. That the federal government would call a private media company like Twitter or Facebook and say, cancel this speaker or take down this post. It's crazy that the government would do that.
And this really hit the most extreme, I'd say, during the Biden administration when they were trying to roll out the vaccine program. While they're trying to push that program, they also tried to censor anyone who was basically arguing against it. And they pushed us super hard.
Que bom,
to
pelo
take down
menos
things that
agora eles
were
se
honestly
sentem mal
right? They basically pushed us and said, anything that
essa galerinha do
says that
mal,
vaccine side
como se
effects,
dizer.
you basically need to take down. These people from the Biden administration would call up our team and scream at them and curse. And it's these documents are, it's all kind of out there.
Chairman Huizenga and Ranking Member Kamlager-Dove, I appreciate the invitation to speak with you today. I believe it's my patriotic duty to do so because the premise of this hearing, the so-called censorship industrial complex.
So Nina Jankowicz was the head of the government disinformation bureau that was set up during the Biden administration to police speech.
That, of course, caused an uproar in this country. It was quickly considered a bad idea, and it was abolished. But the idea that the government would have a ministry of truth is so Orwellian and scary to all Americans that their speech would be policed, and if they didn't say what the government approved, they would be punished.
What ended up coming out in a series of leaks around the Disinformation Governance Board in April 2022 was that CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, had as its list effectively of disinformation categories that it was focused on was anything that basically talked about open borders. They called it irregular migration, Ukraine policy, climate change, abortion. These things have nothing to do with cybersecurity, and they have nothing to do with national security at all. There's no reason that the federal government department set up to stop another 9/11 should be stopping Americans from talking to other Americans about the relative use of coal versus, lithium batteries as a source for energy. But the fact is they saw this as a way to control political discourse everywhere.
They accused everything of being racist. That rapidly spread into the sexual.
Agora a microfonia pegou pesado, né? Será que eu já posso voltar ao normal? Peraí que, né? Enquanto tiver microfonia, a gente não pode dar continuidade, né? Acho que já tá melhor agora, né? Tá, deixa eu já aproveitar e compartilhar o pronto.
The problem is the censorship apparatus. These people that were involved in information warfare in the Cold War and then in the global war on terrorism are still embedded in our government agencies. And you can replace for example, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, and you can put political appointees at the top levels. But deep in the bowels of the bureaucracy, those people still exist.
In a very Orwellian way, you discover that there's this whole ecosystem of censorship. Government agencies, government bureaucrats going through Uncle Bob's tweets in a very granular way, but also a lot of government-financed NGOs, a contradiction in terms. I don't know how you get government financing in a non-government agency, but that's a thing.
Many of those NGOs are populated by government employees, what we call the revolving door. People that work for an NGO, they go in and work for the Department of Homeland Security. A new administration comes in, they leave the Department of Homeland Security, and they go back to an NGO.
But the fact is this innovation really marked the advent of the era that we're in now, which is that the movement of intelligence work from being...
NewsGuard is very similar to what we're talking about with EIP. Their actual effect is to handcuff and gag financially conservative outlets. And how do they do that? NewsGuard ostensibly is out there to serve a public service. Now they're here to help advertisers make sure they don't advertise with untrustworthy sites.
Your disinformation artist went to your website is going to get a low score. Your low score NewsGuard is going to be the State Department is going to monitor your social media feed for disinformation. State Department's not even supposed to deal with that. To your advertising is going to be because you were information artist and you Hunter Biden did wrong. And all of a sudden I started to see all the elements of my business model being shut down, and I knew it wasn't an accident. I knew that it was part of organized conflict.
So there's a case right.
And system guarantees that advertising dollars flow only to left-wing
NewsGuard is very similar to what we're talking about with EIP. Their actual effect is to handcuff and gag financially conservative outlets. And how do they do that? NewsGuard ostensibly is out there to serve a public service. Now they're here to help advertisers make sure they don't advertise with untrustworthy sites.
Classiciders matters.
So there's a case right now that X Corporation has filed against the World Federation of Advertisers because 90% of the advertising dollars colluded to keep those dollars away from conservative media platforms like X after Elon Musk took it away. So that case is proceeding now on claims that collusion was in violation of the antitrust laws.
Again, a lot of people don't even know that 7 former #1 heads of the CIA...
Peraí, gente. No microfone.
USAID funds the Atlanta Council. In addition to DoD grants, there are separate grants to the Atlanta Council from the Army, from the Navy, from the Air Force, from the Marines. And then lo and behold, the Atlanta Council DFR lab gets a senior place in the trust and safety teams of every major social media company. As soon as Facebook announced a trust and safety outside oversight agglomeration of credentialed fact checkers who would be responsible for website takedowns, the Atlanta Council was first on the list. Same thing where they partnered with YouTube and they ran their hooks into Twitter. The Atlanta Council DFR lab was on the founding of outside advisors to the Brazilian TSE, the censorship court within Brazil, which is the subsection of the Supreme Court. They worked personally, I believe it was Graham Brookie and Emerson Brookings, where they went down and trained the STF how the court can structure its censorship of the 2022 election in Brazil, the same way they successfully censored the election in 2020 to stop Trump. All locally clustered on the board of one organization you've probably never heard of, which is simultaneously funded by 11 different government agencies. As we speak, the Atlanta Council is funded by 11 different U.S. government agencies. The Department of State, the Department of Defense, the National Endowment for Democracy, by the way, funds it as well. They fund the Atlanta Council. USAID funds the Atlanta Council. In addition to DoD grants, there are separate grants to the Atlanta Council from the Army, from the Navy, from the Air Force, from the Marines. And then lo and behold, the Atlanta Council DFR lab gets a senior place in a trust and safety. The National Endowment for Democracy at the same time created this giant network to try to stop Bolsonaro's...
Applied to Bolsonaro like it was applied to Donald Trump.
You can spin the globe and I can tell you how information integrity is defined in Brazil, in Poland, in Italy, in Czech Republic, in Madagascar, in Bangladesh. Here's a cheat code. Go to Journal of Democracy, the in-house journal of the National Endowment for Democracy, put in the country name, put in the catchphrase, threat to democracy, and I will tell you with 100% where they went. The National Endowment for Democracy at the same time created this giant network to try to stop Bolsonaro's election. 6 of the 9 formal fact-checking groups that existed in Brazil at the time of the 2022 election were U.S. government funded, and 2 of them got direct grants, not just from USAID, but directly from the U.S. Embassy in Brasilia, directly from the State Department.
We watched the very ideas that were born and honed here, the disinformation czar, the global engagement center, the grants, the rating systems, the social credit scores. We saw it being exported to Europe. We saw it exported to Latin America. We saw it.
Here's a cheat code. Go to Journal of Democracy, the in-house journal of the National Endowment for Democracy, put in the country name, put in the catchphrase, threat to democracy, and I will tell you with 100% certainty how 99.999% of disinformation is defined in that country. It will be defined as anyone, news institution, social media account, NGO, civil society organization who supports the group or movement that the National Endowment for Democracy is labeled a threat to democracy. It is that predictable. It is that extensive.
And if you look now at what's happening in Europe, Germany, for example, it's very scary.
that you can be arrested for just posting on social media something that is deemed to be impolite. And then the cops will come to your apartment, take away your computer, and take you to jail.
It's illegal to display Nazi symbolism, a swastika organized to assault somebody in public. Yes. And it's a crime to insult them online as well?
Yeah, you can insult someone in the internet.
Watching on 60 Minutes, German officials actually laughing and celebrating the fact they arrested someone for calling a politician a penis.
Rose complained about a tweet that called him a Pimmel, a German word for male anatomy. That triggered a police raid and accusations of excessive censorship by the government. As prosecutors explained to us, in Germany, it's okay to debate politics online, but it can be a crime to call anyone a Pimmel, even a politician.
USAID had a formal program that was administered by... You cannot pass that law in the United States because of the First Amendment, but a foreign country can that doesn't have the First Amendment. And if you simply get foreign countries to pass laws that are constitutional there...
Western civilization will be defined by how these next 5 to 10 years of history play out. And we haven't touched on things like artificial intelligence, which poses an enormous challenge to humanity.
You know, there's a temptation to try to think that artificial intelligence can sort out in some godlike function and falsity. The DARPA, which is a Pentagon, essentially quasi-think tank, they did the Civil Sanctuary Initiative that was to create an AI that would be able to scour the internet and just falsity. Now that's out there somewhere. We don't know which companies have bought it, who's using it, who's not. It was created and now it's gone.
You can force the social media companies to their knees.
So the situation's pretty grim for free speech globally. And it's
Western civilization will be defined by how these next 5 to 10 years of history play out. And we haven't even touched on things like artificial intelligence, which poses an enormous challenge to humanity.
You know, there's a temptation to try to think that artificial intelligence can sort out in some godlike function truth from falsity. The DARPA, which is a Pentagon, essentially quasi-think tank, they did the Civil Sanctuary Initiative that was to create an AI that would be able to scour the internet and discern truth from falsity. Now that's out there somewhere. We don't know which companies have bought it, who's using it, who's not. Just was created and now it's gone.
Who's Jared Cohen?
Allowing them to proliferate.
Jared was at the...
So we take challenges like radicalization, fragile states, governance, illicit networks, and these are all challenges that most of the world's population would agree are hugely important. And there's just, we've underexplored how technology can actually be part of the solution.
So Jigsaw, can't make this stuff up, became the new roving sort of half AI, half human moderation, search out dis and misinformation or perspectives are quite true or are, quote, misleading, and then figure out ways to correct that or address that.
Google Jigsaw produced what was really the world's first retail censorship, AI censorship product, which is one of the reasons that this pursuit really captured me when this was made publicly accessible in early 2017, because the first 3 things that Google Jigsaw trained its model on were the 2016 presidential election, the UK Brexit vote, and the issues around climate change. In 2016, 0% of political speech was moderated by AI. By 2019, over 98% of political speech was pre-flagged by AI. I told everyone in my contact book, if this AI censorship technology is implemented, it will be the end of the Western concept of free speech.
This is worse than George Orwell's 1984. In George Orwell's 1984 world, at least the government was doing this in the open. They were censoring and creating thought police in the open. In this case, the JIRA ticketing system, what was happening in 2020, the government was doing with the private sector, was George Orwell marries Franz Kafka and the trial.
There's nothing comparable. There simply is nothing comparable in terms of the size and scope of people's free speech rights being suppressed. This is the broadest attack on the First Amendment and free speech in the history of the country.
Stalin had died in 1953, and in 1956, Khrushchev gave his secret speech, as it was called, where he confessed all the sins of Stalin and talked about how Stalin was brutal and an awful dictator and everything was terrible. So all the socialists, believe it or not, all the socialist countries in the world tried to liberalize some. They were going to retain socialism, but they were going to give people more freedom, so they didn't come off looking like Stalin. Mao comes up with this idea that was called the 100 Flowers campaign, and his declaration was let 100 flowers bloom, let 100 schools of thought contend. And so this was a free speech experiment. In fact, he encouraged criticism of the government. What Mao believed was that he had brainwashed the Chinese people so thoroughly that they would speak up and support socialism. First, they were scared and they started to write things. They were encouraged to write things. They were celebrated when they wrote things. So over the course of a few months, they spoke more.
So the children were left alone there. I was born in China, spent my first 26 years in Mao's China, lived through the horrors of the Cultural Revolution. I was assigned to work in a candy factory. We had about 1,000 workers. Lots of us has the same experience. You see persecution, you see death. I remember in 1970, every 10 days we were dragged to see execution. One of my grandfathers spent 20 years in jail. My other grandpa spent 4 years in jail. And my aunt spent 11 years in jail for saying not liking Mao's wife. So every adult spent time either in jail or in labor camps. So we pretty much grow up ourselves. What I can tell you about censorship is I did not know such a thing as censorship. Growing up in China, everything was controlled. We have only one source of information, and that's from the party. The education system, the media, the entertainment, movies, it is everything. And so when you have no access of information, actually, you did not even know you're being controlled. And I did not know there's such a thing as censorship.
So somehow, when I was 17, I saw somebody posting a big character poster on the wall. They denounced Mao and, basically the CCP said, it's a feudal fascist regime. It was eye-opening to me. So I said, I got to know those people.
So I lived through Mao's Cultural Revolution. I saw the beginning. I saw the end is that a country totally divided, people turned against people, children against parents.
My mother reported, my mother was a loyal communist anyway.
Western elites have said for a long time,
Da terra do tio Sam, né? Achando que eles iam dar dinheiro para os comunistas e eles deixariam de ser comunistas, né? Então, é esse o grande problema. O dinheiro não resolve a moralidade de uma pessoa, né? Rain Linkalakal 88, thanks so much. Like Don, thanks sister. God bless you. I give your moderator in my chat. I give blue. And I pinning your phrase. Thanks so much, sister. God bless you. Welcome to my channel, to my live, and this is Tamo junto. Nossa amiga Link, Calacal, nome bonito. Legal o seu nome, né? Bem maneiro. your name. Thanks so much, sister.
I remember in the late 2000s, at some point, I remember in the New York Times, Tom Friedman wrote this op-ed, we should learn from Chinese governance practices.
Money in politics is so out of control. Really, our Congress is a form for legal bribery. That's really what it's come down to.
Look at how effective Communist China is. I feel like there's this kind of love affair, this idea of efficiency, this idea of top-down control.
Heard about it? A lot of people haven't heard about it. And China is known for its Great Wall, but they CCP built a great firewall, control everything. Because in the beginning, the people think, okay, now there's a big hope from China because internet. You can't control internet. Yes, we could. So if you say something that the government doesn't like, they shut you down. Not only shut you down, so it's even better than before. Because before they have physically find you, and then now they can just mark your phone and you can access to your bank account. You can't buy plane ticket. I call it digital.
A friend of mine once retweeted I sent something in tweet. He copied my tweet and sent from his Chinese social media. I forgot what it was. It was very mild. And next day, he went shopping and said, no, sorry, you can't shop because your bank account is suspended for a week.
In the Western world, we don't have that. But there are ways in which we have learned from Chinese methodology to be able to shut down conversation in the United States. And it's done in the same context. After all, what does China argue why the CCP needs to have control over the flow of information? National security.
But in America, same thing. I was banned. I don't know. Just one day, my Twitter account would not work. I had no idea what. I don't even know what I said. And they never gave me a notice. Just blocked me for about 2 weeks. I feel like back to China.
And in communist societies, well, the truth isn't. The truth is what the party needs the truth to be. They believe in a very real way that truth is just a manifestation of what someone says that is in power. But that's what they believe. That's what defines truth.
I think a lot of people, including me before, thought that communism is an economic system. They want to share the wealth and redistribute the wealth to everyone, so that's so-called, then we have equality. But not quite accurate. And communism is basically a religion. So it wants to replace the other religion, especially Christianity.
Some of the most interesting polling I've seen done in the last couple of years is done by the pollster Scott Rasmussen. He's a great person to talk to. He has measured the difference between what we call the 1%ers in America and the masses, the 99% that they govern. You're a 1%er if you run a major company. You're a 1%er if you're a manager of a large federal agency. You're a 1%er if you're worth a couple $1 billion. The viewpoints of the 1% are vastly disconnected to the viewpoints of the 99%. That conflict explains why the 1% has been so interested in crushing populism, because whatever ideas they came up with in their ivory tower college classrooms or their whiteboard big tech laboratories, they no longer resemble what the American people or the masses want.
And what is censorship? It's control your speech. It's more than control your speech. It's control your thinking. The first thing they want to control is your mind. That's why censorship is so important to the totalitarian regimes.
And so the idea with the censorship that we've been under for the last few years, COVID-19 being the most, I think, prominent example, was that there were just certain things we weren't supposed to be able to think about, that there were alternative treatments that were possible or worth experimenting with, that there might be drugs that could be repurposed to do something, that the vaccine that they were pushing on us as an experimental gene therapy that didn't actually have proper safety testing. There were simply things they didn't want the idea even to enter our...
If you can't even...
Acho que eu já tinha... Ah, tá. Acho que é sua live, né? Você tá na sua live. Thanks so much. Eu tava vendo a live dela. I see live stream of Lucy Charmy Mix vlog. Thanks so much, sister. God bless you.
Censored. Every scandal by the government is censored. People can't even find out the facts to be able to form an alternative system of beliefs. Really is the hallmark of total control.
One of the sentiments that Rasmussen discovers in that gap between the 1%ers and the masses is that the 1%ers think they're smarter than the rest of the country, and therefore it's their job to make sure that they make us make the right decisions.
They're going to rearrange the society. They're going to re-engineering human nature because they feel they had the power.
At the end of the day, people say, what's the motive? It's about holding on to power and money. It's the oldest tale in human history.
But I think at the heart of it, I've long felt that it was a bubbling God complex these people harbor in their souls.
They replaced the God, the state.
Mas, outra vez, okay.
The reason it's unsolvable is that you have to depend on people to have critical thinking. And there's lots of evidence, and if you look at Trump's campaign and the various aspects of misinformation we're seeing in the United States, people are highly gullible.
The internet is a tool. Social media is a tool. Tools don't control us. We control them. We can remake. We, a select group of human beings, are able to sit in a room and come together.
I think if you want to talk about a way that having this deep engagement with communist China changed us, I think I would argue this is a profound way. Because, the U.S. system, which is really kind of the basis of every liberal democracy that exists right now in the world, actually it's based on the idea of creating a structure that prevents government from imposing too many rules.
Everyone, all this entire ecosystem of censors complaining about free speech and how toxic it is and how dangerous it is, and how we have to do something about the ability of Americans to speak their minds, that tells me that that's the key to everything. They're going after that first. And there's a reason why the founders put it first.
The monarch in England tried to suppress control.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Mano do céu, velho. Gente, eu acho que eu vou ter que ficar em torno de não sei quantos dias, né? Acho que não voltou o negócio.
The project. If I can take that, when Benjamin Franklin left the Constitutional Convention, the lady asked him, what have you designed? What have you made? And, his terrific answer was, a republic, if you can keep it.
If we look at the Star Spangled, our national anthem is us asking the question day after day, did we lose the American experiment last night as we slept?
What it means to be American is to be able to think as you want and to speak as you think. And that is a long tradition in our country, that nobody tells anybody else what they can say or what they can think.
And so it's a fundamental question that every American, in my opinion, should be asking all the time. Are we still the land of the free?
Is America still the land of the free?
Is America still the land of the free?
Yes, it is. I believe it is. As long as I keep talking about freedom. it will be alive.
We're going to have bad days. We're going to have losses. We've been through this in America, and we've come out stronger before.
We're never going to lose the war for free speech. We're going to lose battles for free speech, okay?
This has always been the American fight. We fight with each other over our freedoms. Generally, the most important fight is the next one, not the last one.
So we shouldn't be afraid to fight for principles. We shouldn't be shocked or surprised that those full of hubris are going to try to control us.
Given humanity and the fact that we're fallen, there's always going to be evil in the world that wants to suppress our God-given freedoms. And if the battle will always continue, we'll win some and lose some. But one of the ways you win is by highlighting where the battle's taking place.
We must meet them in the battlefield of ideas, and we must meet them with love and compassion, and we must show them that adherence to these kind eternal truths is the surest path forward for a flourishing.
In the U.S., I feel me